Hey, what is up, guys? Evanaldo here. Wanted to talk to you now. I'm in a really nice neighborhood walking around Boca Raton, Florida right now. And the reason this neighborhood is symbolic kind of to me a little bit is, and what I want to talk to you first to answer the first thing I was going to say is I want to talk to you more about how to get what you want. Generally how to get what you want. Obviously everybody wants something. Naval Ravikant says that, not wanting something is the equivalent of already having it, kind of in terms of how you feel about that and certain things, being satisfied. And, it's all relative. It's all relative. I mean, at the end of the day, one man's treasure is another man's trash a lot of times. Sometimes people want some things that others don't want. When you look at a lot of the have-nots, I meet a lot of the have-nots. Ray Dalio says it a lot, the haves and have-nots. I meet people like that, and I could tell very quickly a lot of times. Now, having experienced what I've experienced, I could tell kind of quickly why, somebody doesn't have too much money. Why they're not that successful, why they're not where they want to be, why they, may not be able to afford the apartment they want, the car they want, the house they want, the lifestyle they want, why they don't have the job they want, why they don't have the business they want, anything, what have you. And it's kind of the way they act about it. A lot of times they just don't see it. They don't see the possibility because of what was told when they were young a lot of times. There's certain people that I meet that and they they may not know that I do a YouTube channel. They may not know really who I am or what success I've had. They don't really know. And they tell me, sometimes they're like, oh, I don't drive a real expensive car. I know some of you guys know the car I drive. It's not it's by no means a real expensive car. It's an Acura RDX, nothing crazy. And they're like, oh man, that must be expensive. You shouldn't be driving, you know what I mean? You got to save money, all this type of stuff, they can't even see like that vision or whatever. And not everybody says that to me, but I mean, there's this certain, I could just tell when I talk to these people, the outlook they have. You got to dream, you got to think big. I remember one time I said to somebody, you got to dream or whatever, and they go, I'm too old, I'm done, Drew. They started yelling at me about that. That was the answer. Just they get annoyed if you even just talk about the possibility of positive thoughts, the possibility of that. I mean, everything is imagined, and then it comes into fruition. First, it has to be imagined. That's the first thing that has to happen. I was rewatching the movie Spaceballs the other day. One of probably the funniest movies, probably one of the best comedies ever made, I would say. Hilarious movie. And, I was thinking about Elon Musk, always talks about, going to Mars, the travel to Mars. He was on the Nelk Boys podcast. He's been on a bunch of podcasts. He's talking about that, the travel time, say at least 3 months, I think it would take to get there. And I was kind of thinking, in terms of real space travel, other than, just orbiting around the Earth, going to the moon, what are the things people think about? They're thinking about probably Star Wars. They're thinking about, gravity, these spaceships. I'm thinking about possibility, simulated gravity in outer space, all of these things. And I think, it takes time, but I think we will see that. I think we will see something, not exactly, obviously, it's going to be different, but I think we will see something like that. Everything is imagined first. I was watching that, some clips from that episode of The Simpsons where, I know this is all just comedy, all just cartoons and, funny movies and stuff, but bear with me. I was watching this, The Simpsons, that Simpsons episode where they're in the future. I forget what year it's supposed to be, probably 2020, 2030, something like that. And, they have the Apple Watch, basically. They have the watch that you could talk on the phone with, you could talk to it. They have it's called a picture phone, but it's really FaceTime. A lot of that stuff, when that stuff is imagined, it comes into fruition years later. The first thing would be to imagine it. The first thing would be to realize the possibility. That's the first thing that you need. The first thing that you need. And the reason why I talked about this is significant to me, this neighborhood. I remember one time, a while back, and I was walking through this neighborhood, and I remember this was when I was first, really trying to start something big. I didn't have too much money at the time. Nobody knew my name really. It wasn't probably wasn't in the best place. I had some money saved up. I didn't have the best trajectory of what I was going to do. And I remember I went to this neighborhood, which is it's near like a main shopping center in Boca Raton. And I just happened to be walking down and looking at I was kind of intrigued by how nice some of the houses were on some of these streets. Really modernized, really nice. And I kept looking at them, walking down the street, and I was like, I can afford this. One of these could be mine. I was imagining kind of what it would be like. And I kept repeating to myself, probably, I don't know, many, many times, dozens, if not hundreds of times, I can afford this. I have this, this could be mine, all this thing. This is mine. In the present moment, they say it's more important to do that like that. But think about it that way. I mean, look at this. I like the design of some of these modern houses. It's so cool. And it worked. You think about these things and you envision it, and you gotta, it's hard sometimes. There's always that negative voice. No, you can't do this or whatever. The thing with that is just try to observe it and then let it pass and think about more of the things you want. Just think about it, get excited. How would that feel? Just visualize it. And then other things, obviously, you can watch videos of it. You could go to places, like exactly what I did. You go to places like this, you look at the houses. That's one of the things to do. And and back to that, back to what Elon Musk, the travel to Mars, those type of things. A lot of the stuff, it's not exactly going to look like all these movies or whatever, but a lot of this stuff, when it's imagined, when it's envisioned, that's the first steps. That's the first steps. Even if it's in a cartoon, even if it's in a comedy movie, that's what we saw. And I know people would be thinking, well, it's just, it's not necessarily these movies. Anyone could just envision and think of that. Sure, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's the visualization of it. And I think probably in our lifetimes, we will probably see, because that's really what you need for, you look at, I'm by no means a scientist or an expert on any of this stuff. Take what I say with a grain of salt on this. But, you look at traveling to Mars, in the spaceship. I think, kind of, obviously, it's going to be tough, just really closed tightly together with people, you call them astronauts, going there, zero gravity. I think we're going to get to the point where it's going to be like in the Star Wars or whatever, where it's going to be gravity keeping you down, some type of simulated gravity. I think that's one of the things that's going to happen. And I think there's going to be a possibility to do it. Again, obviously, the atmosphere on Mars really, you got to build, I believe. Can't breathe the oxygen there. So there's a lot of issues, but you do have gravity. That's the main thing I guess you need, and you could build structures where humans would just stay in all the time. But enough of, this speculation. I was just thinking, it's just one of the things I was thinking about, that, the first thing, it has to be imagined. It has to be imagined. And a lot of creativity, a lot of invention is probably taking things that were already invented and putting them together into different things. I remember, who said this? I think it was, a lot of people have said this. I don't know the exact name, but, they look at science fiction movies. People say, oh, wow, so creative, so original. Not exactly. It's already taking different things and putting them together. Like, you look at the concept of, Apple Watch. It's a watch and a phone. You just put that together. Not the most impossible thing to think of. You look at these in Star Wars, ships that fly in space. It's like a plane just in space. Space and plane. It's that simple. We already have that to a certain extent. I mean, we don't have them, as advanced as they're depicted in Star Wars or in any other these other space movies. And you think about it too, like a lot of what happens in society, a lot of what happens, what's accomplished, these things, a lot of them are done by the motivation are inspired by the motivation. I think Kennedy, whether or not you actually believe we made it to the moon, if we didn't, we definitely have the technology to do so. I think we did, but whether or not you believe that, Kennedy was, very motivational, very inspiring in terms of that possibility, in terms of doing that with his goal. And then he dies, before it happens, obviously. It was 1969, we did it. And, probably that legacy, probably that was what motivated us to do it, because Elon Musk was saying, we really didn't have it was so advanced for us to make it at that point. The technology really almost, for that point in time, it was crazy that we were able to do it. The technology almost wasn't there. We were just coming out with all this stuff. That was basically the first invention of kind of computers, how they were able to use the navigational system to kind of land on the, I know they had to kind of overrule it to land on the moon, overrule what it was telling them to do. But that was, the first kind of invention of computers, 1970s, late 60s, that area. And it was, kind of this development. A lot of this was spurred by, the war, of those times where you have a lot of death, you have a lot of pressure, you have a lot of crazy things going on. People kind of tend to focus a little bit more. That's another thing that, that fear of death, that fear of, kind of hard to explain, but those fears kind of motivate people sometimes. It's like hard times make strong men, that type of thing. I would say that was motivated there. And then kind of, post that area, post-war, 1960s, Kennedy, very motivational, those type of things. That spurs people to try. That spurs people to do these type of things, to accomplish these type of things. So, we could look at, what might happen in the future. Kind of, we look at history, that's probably the biggest, that's really the biggest thing. And what I do in trading and technical analysis, you're looking at history to make predictions. Some people think, it's all astrology, it means nothing or whatever. Hell, there's even people who look at astrology to make predictions, based on that. I forget what that's even based on, if that's based on what normally happens. Yeah, I think that is based on what normally happens in certain years. I'm not gonna, try to butcher it, pretend I know too much about that. It's not something I have a, huge knowledge on, the astrology and the moon cycles and the planets and all that. But, some people say this is a bad year. 2022 is going to be a bad year because of it, similar to 2001 was one of those years. I think 2015 was one of those years. You didn't see much in 2015. 08, I believe, was one of those years as well. There's different things to look at, obviously. One is the ancient, some ancient writings or whatever. I forget what it was. Somebody was telling me about that, but it is interesting to look at. And we're looking at these historical things to kind of make our predictions. I was listening to Charlie Munger. I believe it was pretty recent when he was talking about probably one of the recent speeches he was, given based on, kind of inflation or interviews, I should say, based on inflation and all that. And what I didn't realize too is he was saying the 10% that on average you get with the S&P 500 each year was kind of, this is really the only time in history we've seen that good of a return. This is the only time in history we've seen that good of a return and that good of a, that much opportunity. Charlie Munger said he believes kind of, I don't, this is almost unmotivating. I don't really like this. That kind of, he was born, it was luck. He was born in the right thing. And he mentioned, kind of rising housing costs, inflation, all these things hurting, the average person, preventing them from maybe having the opportunity that he had, or him and Warren Buffett had, all those years. So it's interesting to see, it's interesting to look at, it's interesting to see. I almost don't like to look at those things, even if they are kind of true, even if you're kind of disadvantaged. You kind of got to look at it as a way, where you are disadvantaged, say that's true. Say you're disadvantaged a lot, say previous generations before you, especially, some of my viewers are older, but I'm in my mid-20s. Say the older ones had it a lot easier than you, and you're still able to succeed. That makes it more impressive. You know what I mean? It's all relative how things look. It's all relative how a lot of things look and how it happens. if you make $1 million a year, but everybody in your circumstance makes that, it's not that impressive. If you make say you only make 30 grand a year, but everyone in your circumstances makes 5 grand a year, it's impressive. There's some parts of the world where people only make, I think, 7 grand on average. It depends on the area. So it's relative in that aspect. So I think, we look at kind of how civilization kind of gets better over time. It trends up with time. What a lot of people like to say, trends up with time. The markets, they trend up with time as we look at, in recent years, the last 100 years. Charlie Munger kind of reminded me and probably a lot of other people in that interview that this is really the only time in history, the only civilization time where we had those returns in the S&P 500, where we had that much buying power expand, that much freedom. And really, you're talking about buying power, it's just more freedom at the end of the day. Obviously, it's freedom units. Every dollar you have, it's another freedom unit that you have. It changes, between at the lowest, fully dependent on government. I guess you can make that argument, or just if you're, just scraping by, you got an apartment that's maybe really cramped. You're driving a, very old car, living pretty frugally, never going out that much, all these type of things. But as it goes up, then your freedom, it keeps going up depending on your net worth. Maybe you could own $1 million house, and then after that, $10 million house, and it's a capitalist society, so it goes up all the way. I mean, I think the most expensive houses in America are, could be wrong on this, but I think the most expensive one I've seen, maybe 200 million, could be something for 400 million. I'm not sure, but it's so capitalistic, like it just keeps going up, you know what I mean? And at that point, $400 million house, you got to be a billionaire at that. Pretty much. I'm sure there's some ways to do it with much less, taking a mortgage if you have I don't know how it works at that point. I'm not a billionaire, but it gets interesting. It gets up, and there's good things, there's pros and cons to that. All these, I think as things evolve, new ideas will come out, new ways of governance, new systems will happen. I wouldn't say, we kind of, that quote by Winston Churchill, capitalism is the worst form of government except everything else that's ever been tried. I think that's true. I think that's very true. I think we just need something else that's never been tried before will come, and then it'll probably improve over time. But going back to what I was saying, society kind of trends up, it kind of improves with time. I think this part of history, so if you look at, what was colonial life like, let's say in America, with the 13 colonies, obviously very bad. There was, if you were not, wealthy and white and rich, very bad. It was a big difference between class system. The amount of, you had to go to people in church. If you had money, you sat up front. People without money sat towards the back, things of that nature. A lot of people couldn't vote. That was still relevant. I believe early 1900s, I believe women had the right to vote. I don't know the exact year. I know early 1900s though, so could have been about 100 years ago. I don't know the history exactly, but it changed like that. And I think, what we'll look at maybe in 100 years, a couple 100 years from now, is our society. A lot of people, you were a lot of late wage slaves. You have to go to a job that you don't like. You have to adhere to somebody that you don't want to deal with. You spend a lot of hours in this. You never really get what you want to do what you want to do until you're, retired. You know what I mean? And some people, I think there's more freedom than it was many years ago, where you couldn't break out of that. But now you definitely can break out of it. But the fact that a lot of people didn't break out of it and didn't know they could break out of it, that'll probably go down historically as, what was wrong with our society in modern day and all the other, problems we talk about. I think that's what'll definitely be talked about. So the main thing too is you look at, I'm just kind of walking in circles now almost, but you look at the things you want kind of, and a lot of times, sometimes I think about, what do I want? What do I want to visualize? What do I want to think about that will excite me, as a future goal, as a thing to obtain. And sometimes I don't know, but I think I would just say keep searching. Keep searching. There's got to be something, you know what I mean? There's got to be something, and just visualize and, you know, try to get those negative thoughts away. You know, I've said this in a lot of the vlogs a lot of times. Try to get those negative thoughts away and just keep thinking about, be excited for the end thing. And going back, this is another point I want to make about what Charlie Munger said. You know, he was talking about how he's always kind of fully invested with Berkshire or whatever, meaning they don't really hold much cash, but they hold cash when they can't find something that they like, when they can't find something that looks good. And lately, you know, kind of when I look at the charts, when I look at all these things, a lot of stuff I can't find much that, I mean, you watch my videos, I know a lot of you watch the analysis videos too, and, you know, I can't find stuff that looks good right now. So that's the thing. But the thing that he didn't mention, this is never financial advice, risky, but there are some short funds. You know, there are ways to take advantage. Obviously risky, you got to know what you're doing, risk management, all those type of things. Never financial advice. I just try to do the best I can. I'm not always right, but there are short funds. You know, you look at, was it Michael Burry, The Big Short, you know, those type of things. There are short funds. There are ways to make money when the market goes down, you know. And it's harder to do that because you always want to bet that it's going up. You always want to kind of, even though how it seems like people are so negative, but they're really not at the end of the day. I mean, they always want to, you know, they look historically that, you know, it trends up with time, so why would you bet against it? You know what I mean? And you look at all these people who just keep yelling, you know, it's like the boy who cried wolf. They keep saying it's going to crash, it's going to crash, it's going to crash. And then 10 years later, it finally does. And then they said they were right. You know, that's that type of thing. But look, you know, if you see something that looks good, it's inverse, you can capitalize on that. You got to know when to get out. And that's another thing too. You know, there's different ramifications. People talk about, you know, how you should just buy and hold forever and then borrow against it when you need money. I used to be more into that. I think now that's, you know, it definitely works, especially if you're in a very high taxed area. That would make sense. But you got to be careful with margin calls and all that. And I mean, you look at the way Michael Saylor is doing, I believe his margin calls are very, very low, like 3,000. So that's, you know, you're basically betting that when he's borrowing against it, you're betting that it could go down 95%. So you got to do it in a very safe way. Just to kind of finish this off, got cut out a little bit before there, but about, you know, Michael Burry, I was talking about, you know, he's bullish on imprisonment and mental health. Pretty negative, I believe. I don't know the full, like, I didn't hear the exact quote, but people were talking about it on Twitter. And, you know, just look at I wouldn't necessarily, you know, you're probably better off just trying to short the dang market rather than, you know, go into imprisonment and those type of things. But look where there's opportunity, even if it's all fallen down. There's there's people. He was the one, that's the example, The Big Short, the movie, great movie. You know, how he shorted the housing market and did very, very well. You know, it wasn't working in the beginning. And then when everybody loses trust, when you completely look like you made the wrong decision trying to short the housing market, then it works. You know, then it works out. So that's kind of how it is. It's a fun time. I mean, at the end of the day, imagine the things you want. Look at it like that. And, you know, we have a lot of power. You can get the things you want. That's what I will say. You know, most important thing, believe it is possible. I think that's the most important thing. Too much traffic here, a lot of noise. I'm gonna get going, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Have a good one, guys. Goodbye.